Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ed Tech in the Bend. This day is full of Indiana rockstar educators, and no more rock stars than Diana right there. So, first, before my friend Allison gets to introduce my friend Diana, I want to remind everybody to introduce themselves. Please tell us where you're watching from and your name, of course. That's how you introduce yourself. And then have a great time. If you have any questions, we're going to try and get to those at the end. And this is going to be a lot of fun.
Other way. Hey, happy Friday! My name is Allison Schlofeld, and I am part of the Ed Tech in the Bend team. I am so excited to welcome Diana Gill to talk about Copyrighteous. As you listen to Diana, please share using the hashtag ETITB20 on your social media. We also encourage you to check out Diana's website and buy her book for more great ideas. This is the most fashionable, the most boss girl lady you will ever listen to. She's my favorite Indiana educator. Here's Diana.
Wow, Allison, that was amazing. I'm so flustered right now. Let's get going. Thanks for being here today. Welcome to EdTech in the Bend. It's a great conference. I'm happy that we are able to still connect with each other virtually this year. Seth and Matt and Allison, Holly, all great humans and great EdTech professionals. So I'm so thrilled to be here with you guys today. And welcome to 10 Ways to Get Copyrighteous. As Allison said, my name is Diana Gill, and I'm the Director of Technology for East Porter County Schools in Northwest Indiana, not too far away from most of you guys. I am a former English teacher. I'm also president of the Indiana Connected Educators Board, and I'm the author of Copyrighteous, which is a Dave Burgess publication. So during our live session today, I would love to give away a copy of Copyrighteous to one person. So if you're on Twitter, go ahead and tweet using the hashtag Copyrighteous. Just share any goodies that you glean from today's conversation, and I'll pick a winner from that conversation on Twitter. Also, please be sure to include hashtag ETITB20, EdTech in the Bend 20, if you would like to grab a copy of that. Okay, so being copyrighteous, it's all about honoring educators as creative professionals, while encouraging our creativity to be responsible. It's a process that asks permission and shares and cites. So, copyright itself, it doesn't have to be a scary or a stuffy topic. In fact, the idea of copyright does not have to be the death of creativity. Rather, it can be a catalyst for it. So my goal with Copyrighteous and talking about this topic is really to make this conversation more digestible. And I'll say that in 45 minutes, there's no way that we're going to cover everything that there is to talk about with copyright, but this is a good start. And it all comes from the lens of a classroom teacher. So I believe that all educators are creators, and all of us certainly got a crash course in curating and creating online content this past year with our extended e-learning in the spring. And I know that South Bend specifically, I'm pretty sure you guys just got started with e-learning right before we had to do e-learning more often than we ever imagined we would be doing it. I personally turned to the creation of my own digital instructional materials as a way to sort of save myself from this canned curriculum that I was using when I found myself in a job earlier in my career that sort of expected that of me. And I recognized that I was not reaching my students. And at first, when I started making my own things and finding my own things, it was simply about creating something that was more personal and more engaging. And full disclosure, as I mentioned before, I'm not a copyright lawyer, and I also did not have copyright on my radar all the time. And so I'm admitting to all of the mistakes that I'm going to suggest we stop making in the future. So as I got better at designing my own content and curating, the things that I was finding, I started to realize that having a really good understanding of copyright actually helped me as a teacher in a number of ways. So it helped me first by making me a better designer of content, whether that content was digital or traditional, it made me a better designer of it. As I started to search in different places, I got better at vetting content. And then when I was changing where I was going to find the things that I was using in my classroom, I had access to higher quality content, which then showed me higher quality instructional strategies, which then I could utilize when I was designing things from scratch. And beyond that, we all have a responsibility to help our students grow in areas of information literacy and digital citizenship and copyright and all things that are related. That's on us now. It's a growing responsibility along with all the other responsibilities that educators have. But real talk, like these are things that we have to be covering with our kids. And there's no way that we can have these conversations with our students if we don't understand info lit and media lit and dig sit and all of those things ourselves. So it makes sense to me to learn all of that stuff as part of what we're doing anyway as creators and curators of content. It is the perfect way to learn and to know better and to do better as a designer, honoring your own professional freedom as a teacher. So I'm not going to use a fear-based approach here. Of course, you can Google and find a ton of different examples of educators in schools being called out for copyright issues. But instead, I really do think that it's important to care about copyright as we consider ourselves designers of that high quality content. And of course, not getting in trouble is certainly a fringe benefit of that. I'm just taking a second to check the chat here. Right? So it's not about fear, it's just about doing the right thing, and not getting in trouble is always nice. So more real talk here. One of the things that we all feel right now is vulnerability. And in many ways, as we look to the fall, at some point, a component of our class is going to be online, if we're not all online. And when we are online and our classrooms are virtual, we're sort of opening up this constant window into our space. And that feels vulnerable and that feels scary. But that doesn't really have to be a bad thing. Instead, it can be kind of a powerful thing if you leverage it correctly. Just like with writing, if you shift your audience, if you think about your audience, and your audience is bigger, that will kind of change the way that you approach the writing. And I think it's the same way when you design your classroom space. So the process of considering fair use and copyright, it's not just about protecting yourself. It really can become part of your planning process and can assist you in being intentional as you design experiences. So let's jump in here with the first thing to think about, which is fair use. And I want to start by dispelling a huge myth. It is one that we've all probably heard or said. And I do think this myth comes from good intentions to try to make this topic of copyright easier to understand and navigate. And the myth is that because I'm a teacher, I can use whatever I want in my classroom, however I want to use it, and say, well, it's educational use. And that is just not true. However, there is an exception to copyright law that does allow us to use copyrighted materials in our classroom. We just have to follow some guidelines. And so those guidelines come to us in the form of fair use. So fair use is an exception to copyright law that allows us to use copyrighted materials for teaching and reporting and parody and research and criticism without getting permission if you follow the 4 factors of fair use. So for a moment, let's consider this influential quote from the classic film Mean Girls. The limit does not exist. And this kind of hints back to that myth that I was talking about. So in an effort to make this easier for us to talk about just copyright in general in our classrooms, we hope to find a magic bullet, a list, just stop with all this gray area and just tell me what I can and can't do. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist. There are no limits of numbers or percentages to help make this clear cut. And you've probably heard questions like, what percentage of a written work can I use? Or, hey, can I just use 30 seconds of this song? Can I just use 2 minutes of this film clip? I'm good, right? If I follow those clear-cut guidelines. And confession time, I have asked those same questions and I've believed those things. However, There's no magic bullet. There are no numbers, no limits, nothing that can help us that quickly. So instead, we have to understand what copyright is protecting and then what the 4 factors of fair use are to make decisions in our classroom that are more responsible. So again, we can use, as educators, we can use things in our classroom. We just have to follow these 4 factors. Okay, so the 4 factors are, first, the purpose and character of use. So for this, you have to think about how. Think about your goals. Think about the way that you are using copyrighted material. Basically, use your materials as part of direct instruction or to create something new. The second of the 4 is the nature of the work. Think about what. So when you're thinking about this factor, you have to think about the overall goal of copyright itself. Copyright aims to protect works of creative expression. So the more creative the work is, the more careful you have to be with this. So basically, what is the original purpose of the work? The third is the portion used in relation to the whole. So this is about focusing on size. And bottom line here, what is the smallest amount of this copyrighted work that I can use to meet my instructional goal? There's not, again, there are no limits, no percentages, no seconds or time restraints to help us make this clear, but we can use the smallest amount possible to get to our instructional goal. And then finally, the effect on value. So, Reader's Digest version of this one is, are you getting in the way of any potential sale for the copyright holder? Every copyright case has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So every time you choose to use something in your classroom, you have to kind of think about these things. And by the way, as we move on from number 1, I'm going to give you a bunch of ways to make this a lot easier, because it's like, whoa, I have to think about all 4 of these things every single time I try to use something. Maybe, but there are easier ways to do it. This isn't a perfect science, but you can feel good about running it through this process and trying to be more responsible as you create. And the 4 factors, when you think about, does fair use apply in this use case in my classroom, you have to think about all 4 of them together. So all 4 of them have to, to apply when you choose to use something in your classroom that is copyrighted. But here's how you can do it without thinking about all of that mess. And the second way to become copyrighteous is through the use of open ed resources. So open ed resources are teaching materials that are found in the public domain, and they have an open license. So that means that they're licensed in a way that says, hey, use this, change it, make copies, whatever. And it's really easy to navigate because they tell you exactly what you're allowed to do with these materials. So they are released under an intellectual property license of some type that allows them to be used, modified, and shared. There's some confusion here that if something's online and it's free, then I must be able to use it. That's also a myth. So know that open resources, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're free, and free resources doesn't necessarily mean that they're openly licensed. To learn more about this, there's this movement called the Go Open movement, and it was started to bring awareness to the power that these openly licensed resources have to transform teaching, and also to transform the structures that educators put into place to support teachers. So to read more about this, you can head to tech.ed.gov, and if someone could put that in the chat, that would be awesome. Thank you, Seth. You can read more about it there. And some of my favorite places to go to find open ed resources are Creative Commons, OER Commons, CK12, and guru.org. I want to chant this a couple times. I'll restrain myself, but Pinterest is not an open ed platform. Pinterest is not an open ed platform, and Teachers Pay Teachers is not an open ed platform. So we can become copyrighteous by changing where we go to get our stuff. It will save you time too, because all of these things you're allowed to use. So the third way to become copyrighteous is through an understanding of SEPA and COPA. Everyone has very strong opinions about how the internet should be filtered and what students have access to. And there's not really a way to make everybody happy. But I think it helps to understand why things must be filtered. And this is so related to copyright and digital citizenship. And it's important that we're talking about this because digital citizenship is really about knowing what to use, even if everything is available to you. So if nothing were filtered on the internet, a student should still be able to make a decision and self-moderate what they should and should not be accessing. And you do have a role in your classroom to make good choices as to like what technology tools you're encouraging students to use, which is directly related to how you're using resources in your classroom. And I think that having really transparent conversations about these topics makes it easier for you as an educator to advocate for yourself when you're talking to your technology department about what you need. So schools do filter with a number of things in mind, but we have to be compliant with SEPA and COPA. And as a technology director, I promise I'm not just sitting in my office like angrily blocking the internet, I promise. But we do have to follow SEPA and COPA. So SEPA is the Children's Internet Protection Act, and COPA is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And basically, these things tell us that we have to have an internet policy in place to make sure that we are filtering students' access to inappropriate content online, student safety when they're communicating online. We're looking out for any hacking or illegal behaviors. We're protecting their information, and then also restricting access to harmful content. So how does this relate more specifically to your classroom? So your role is to be responsible about the tools and the websites that you are having your students access. And in educational technology, the age of 13 is a really big deal. It's sort of like a digital coming of age, because so many tools that we ask our students to use require students to be at least 13 or older, sometimes 18, before they can use them. And in real life, we know that students have access to apps and things that they're not technically supposed to be using. But we have a legal and ethical responsibility to model digital citizenship and honor that system, SEPA and COPA and all of those things that are in place to protect students. So digital citizenship, again, it's not just a practice of making things off limit for students based on age, but we think about, the possibility of distraction, exposure to content. All of that aside, it's really about teaching them how to self-regulate. And so when it comes to terms of use, the change that I'm asking you to think about is when you say, hey, I want to use this website or I want to use this technology tool, head to the terms of use and read them all word for word. I'm kidding. Don't do that. I don't do that either. I'm imagining that everyone's here laughing with me, but I'll just make myself laugh instead. So when you go to the terms of use or the terms of service, do a quick Control F and just type in 13, or do Control F and type in 18. And you'll find in those documents, and it will outline, this is not for kids. This is not, here are the things, these are the pieces of information, the data that we collect. And this is why, we do not allow this tool for use of, kids 13 and under. You get it. A lot of times there is an education version that you're allowed to use, but you're not allowed to use the consumer version. And so I'm asking you to take that extra step and see. Your school actually might have a process in place already to give students permission who are under the age of 18 or 13 to use specific things. If you aren't sure, figure out who to ask, your technology department, your media specialists. For me, I didn't have anybody to ask that. And I didn't think about it when I first started using technology in my classroom, but once I noticed, hey, I better be a little smarter about this, I met some people on Twitter, and we had a little group chat with 2 other teachers in the state, and I would just say like, hey Lance, like, what do you think of this tool? And then we would read the terms of service together because we're super nerds, and figure out if we should be using it or not. And so first, we're friends now. You can tweet me whenever you want, send me a DM and say, hey, what do you think about this tool? What do you think about this resource? Do you think I can get away with doing this in my classroom? And I'll say, let's find out together. I might not know the answer, but I'll help you figure it out. And then if the answer is like, hey, this doesn't look legit, let's probably steer away from this. We always want to come back and figure out an alternative to accomplish the same instructional goal, which is really the point, right? Like, who cares what technology tool we're using, as long as we're trying to meet those instructional goals for our students. That's the point. So terms of use, terms of service, get it on your radar. It impacts what we should be doing instructionally for content as well. Terms of use actually trumps copyright law. So this is why I'm going to guess things like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Pandora, etc. Like those things are probably filtered, or someone might have suggested you not use them for content in your classroom. And it's because streaming services, things like that, don't actually allow the use in educational spaces. So there is something called the face-to-face teaching exemption that allows you to show films in your classroom for instructional reasons. But terms of services, again, that trumps copyright law. So that's why those streaming services aren't allowed. And I know I'm not, making a bunch of friends saying this, and there's a caveat. So something like Netflix, they will release a list of documentaries, and they'll say like, hey, educators can use these, but only these. And so there's always, well, in a lot of cases, there's an exception, but having an Amazon Echo in your classroom, probably violating terms of service. Using Disney Plus in your classroom, definitely want to avoid things like that. So my point is, make a habit of looking at the terms of service. All right. Fifth way to become copyrighteous is to become familiar with Creative Commons. So Creative Commons has a couple of goals, and they are to give everyone an easy way to license your work. And these licenses allow us as creators to control how our work is being used and shared while encouraging sharing. And they also maintain a digital commons space. And they partner with organizations with the OER, the Open Ed Resources movement that I mentioned earlier, to encourage sharing and the use of those licenses. They work with copyright law, and they help us manage the terms of copyright that apply. All of these licenses do encourage a culture of sharing, and any of these licenses make it easier on us as educators to just tell me how I'm allowed to use this thing, and how can I license my own things once I become comfortable creating, so that I feel really comfortable sharing out with other educators. I will say, if you get to the point where you want to license your own work, and I'll show you what those licenses look like in a sec here. If you get to the point where you want to license your stuff, have a conversation with your district about this, because of course, work for hire does apply to us as classroom teachers. So when you create something for your classroom, technically your district owns it. However, when there are challenges to sharing sometimes. Like I've found stuff that I've made on Teachers Pay Teachers. I've shared it openly, and then I've seen other people selling it. I know that's happened to a lot of my friends. I don't want other people to make money off of the work that I'm doing, but I don't want that to stop me from sharing, because as educators, we know, if people didn't share with me, I would not have survived. And so I want to encourage sharing. But if I have something that's going to help me say like, hey, please use this, just don't sell it. Or, hey, use this professional development workshop that I made, but just don't change this part of it. I get to decide that as the creator, and that makes me feel more comfortable if I'm going to share stuff out. And so luckily, when I went to the superintendent at the time and I was like, hey, how do you feel about this? His reaction was sort of like, well, technically, the school district owns all this stuff, but let's empower our teachers to be designers. And luckily, I've never worked for a school district that was like, hey, don't take your stuff with you when you leave. And I hope none of us are in that situation. So it's kind of finding that balance and having those conversations of, how can we still empower educators as designers to share? So this is what the Creative Commons licenses look like. If you head to creativecommons.org and click Share Your Work, it will ask you a couple of questions, and then it will spit out this cute little license. Look how cute it is. Sorry. And you can literally just copy and paste that on the bottom of your HyperDoc or your HyperSlides, or however you're designing and packaging your content that you're making for your class. And it's nice because I don't have that memorized, right? Like if I look at that license, I don't know what it means at first glance, but I can click on it and it will take me to a page that explains in layman's terms what it means. So if you get to the point where you want to be able to share your stuff out with another district or another teacher, add a Creative Commons license to your things, and then hopefully you're modeling that good responsible creativity, and people will ask about it, and then you'll feel better sharing too. The other thing I want to show you is this awesome Creative Commons license chooser. It's an add-on in Google Docs. It only exists for Google Docs right now. Hopefully it comes for slides as well. I love designing hyperslides. And if you add this to Google Docs, when you go to use it, it will pop up a little dashboard on the side of your Google Doc, and it will just ask you a couple questions, and then you press, it's kind of blurry on my screenshot there, but you press that little blue button and it will insert the license directly into the Google Doc with very minimal effort. And it will tell you, this work is licensed under a Creative Commons license. This is the kind of license. You click on that hyperlink there, it takes you and explains it, how you're allowed to be using it. So the sixth way to become copyrighteous is to start with images. I know we're talking about a lot of things that have the potential to feel very overwhelming and heavy. And let's be real, like we have a lot of things on our plate. And I know, like I imagine copyright is not the most important priority to you in this moment as we look to the fall with COVID. So I want to extend some grace here. Don't freak out. Please don't feel like you have to go back and redo everything you've ever done online and start fresh. That's not the message that I want to share. Instead, I want to suggest that you just start with one manageable thing. And so I always suggest that educators start thinking about copyright with images. So starting with images makes sense to me because it is a tangible, visible change that we can make. It's easy to talk about this with students. What a great way to simply start having conversations about citing and copyright and protection of intellectual property and digital citizenship through images, because we're all asking our students to design and find images online as we come up with different ways for students to show that they've mastered a skill or concept. And you can do this in a couple of ways by first change where you go to find your images. Just a quick Google image search might not be the best way to do this easily. You certainly can, but then there's going to be a lot of additional steps that you need to go through to make sure that you're being responsible as you create with images. And then attribute. So I've had conversations this week about how to cite images properly. And the myth is sort of like, I can use whatever I want as long as I link back to the source, right? Not necessarily. So change where you're going to find those things. And once you know you're allowed to use the image, then you make sure that you properly attribute. So what does that look like? Searching for images. Have students, and then you yourself, start to look for images inside of your G Suite tools. That's going to make your life easier. I'll show you what that looks like. And then my favorite places online to go to get openly licensed images, there are a ton. Please feel free to share additional ones in the chat. I know you've probably got your own place to go, but I love Pixabay so much. I think you're not missing out on quality content just because you're worried about being responsible with what you're using. And then also Creative Commons, of course, because it makes it so easy. And I'm going to show you something that is going to blow your mind and make your life easier when you go to do this, which is always a good thing. So this is what it looks like when you are inside of G Suite. So I'm in this photo here. I'm inside of a Google slide presentation. If I go to Insert Image and search right inside of my Google slide online. So you can do this in Slides, in Docs. You can do this in Google Sites, Google Drawings, whatever G Suite tool you're using. It's going to give you a couple of things. First, it's going to, at the top, it's going to show you a link to that image source. So it still has that Google search engine in there, but it's automatically filtering for things that are allowed to be reused. And then if I click on that at the top, it will take me back to the actual source where the image was found. And then down at the bottom, I can see a little preview of how I'm supposed to be using that image. So then if I go to click on that link to take me back to the source, then I can take a look at the image and see, hey, am I supposed to be using this and how am I allowed to? And you can see in this instance, there is a CC0 Creative Commons license, which is essentially like the public domain, and it is free for commercial use, no attribution required. It's telling me straight up, use this however you want, sell it if you really need to sell a picture of a giraffe, and you don't have to even cite it. Personally, I cite everything because I care about this so much and I want to model. It's an easy way to model. But if you had your students use images that were in public domain or had a CC0 license applied to them, that's still a great way to have the conversation with them. Like, look, if you go out and find images that are licensed in this way, you don't even have to cite, and you're still giving them that knowledge, right? Okay, so here's the mind-blowing one that I love. So that the last example I showed you was within G Suite. If you go to creativecommons.org and you search for images there. creativecommons.org. Let's make sure we're getting that in the chat. Awesome. Sorry, I got distracted by all the awesome conversations that are happening in the chat. So creativecommons.org, they have a one-click attribution for their images. So I head to creativecommons.org and I search for my image, and then over to the right of the image, do you see this little icon that says copy? If I click that, it automatically copies everything I need, which is the title, the author, the source, and the license for my image attribution. Don't worry, I'll show you what that looks like in a couple minutes here. For proper attribution for images, copy it and paste it into my Works Cited page, into my slide notes as an attribution slide at the very end of my presentation. So kids can do this, you can do this. It's definitely something that we should all be modeling. And I click once and then I can paste it in and I'm done. Hallelujah, that's so easy. Okay. So the seventh way we can become copyrighteous is to think about how we're using movies and music in our classrooms, and this is a big one. So I mentioned earlier, there's something called the face-to-face teaching exemption, and in summary, basically that allows us as educators to show films in our classroom as part of face-to-face teaching. But what you really want to know right now is probably if you can show films online when you're teaching virtually. So point blank, taking like a DVD or something that you own or buy and digitizing it as a way to distribute it online is probably not going to be permissible. You know, I get a lot of questions like, well, I bought this film, can I show it in my classroom? Probably under the face-to-face teaching exemption, but notice it's called the face-to-face teaching exemption. So if you're not sure, and if fair use does not apply, don't forget about that, you might need a streaming license. If you're not sure, find your media specialist. They will be able to help you. And again, we're friends. Tweet me if you're not sure if you could do something like that. So I really do, like, just film in general. If we're brick and mortar, thinking about, you know, teaching in our classrooms, I think that film is really just more about an instructional decision than it is about being right or wrong. So I do want to encourage you to create your own instructional videos for your students as a way to design your online learning with personality. So YouTube is a great resource. YouTube terms of service say content is available as is. Link the heck out of your YouTube videos, embed those into your Google Slides. Definitely continue to do that. Just be careful that if you're using YouTube videos and you know, like, whoa, this is copyright violation, you don't want to be implicit in that. So if, but YouTube terms of service, like, you're allowed to use that content as is and share that, link your kids out to that all the time. So when creating films, however, you know, it's not realistic to say, I'm going to create every film, every movie, every instructional video I'm going to use with my students this year. That's probably not realistic. But when you create a film, I want to encourage you to choose a tool to make instructional videos that encourages responsible creativity. And so my favorite for this, I just want to quickly plug WeVideo. So WeVideo, I love it because, and there's a freemium and a premium version, but I love it because it has all kinds of openly licensed content directly inside of WeVideo. And so if our teachers are making videos for kids to learn with, or they're asking students to make videos to show their own learning, there are film clips and songs and images that are all openly licensed and do not require attribution. And you can use all of those things without fear of attribution. Fear of infringement. That's the word I was looking for. It's so weird to do this virtually, and like I'm just talking to myself for all the time. You can also find tons of websites that have openly licensed music. My favorite is bensound, bensound.com. I love that one to find clips of things that are openly licensed to add into my videos and stuff. So sure, it's not going to be permissible to take a Billie Eilish song or something and pop it in the background of your syllabus video for your kiddos. But this is just the reality of being the responsible creator. All right. So this is the remix. Remixing is the 8th way to become copyrighteous, and it is the art of making new stuff specific to you as a teacher. You have a voice as a teacher, and you also are the only one that knows the needs of your students. So it kind of combines the best of both worlds. It's you as a curator going out and finding really high quality materials and then repackaging them and putting them in your own voice. This is not new. Teachers have been remixing forever. We find stuff online, we find stuff from the past, we change it up, we cut and paste, and we rearrange it to make something that works for our class. I definitely violated copyright when I first started doing that. Confession. An improved way to remix, though, is to shift where you go to find your resources and then how you package them together. So instead of heading to Pinterest, heading to Teachers Pay Teachers, or just doing Google image searches to try to find PDFs that people probably shouldn't have put online in the first place, head to those OER platforms, and there are a ton of them specific to different content areas and grade levels. You'll find the one that works the best for you. So you take those things that you're allowed to use, you make changes to them, you give proper attribution for where they come from if you're supposed to, and then finally, you've got this new thing that you can license and then share out with other educators. That's what an improved process of remixing looks like. So David Wiley created this idea of remixing, and he defined it as saying it's the right to combine original and revised content with other material to create something new. So it's a mashup. And I really do think that this is the sweet spot between creator and curator, because I don't want to suggest, that we have to make everything from scratch. That's not real. We don't have time for that. So how can you be a better curator to make it easier on yourself? And so it's all about retaining. What am I allowed to keep copies of? What am I allowed to reuse? What am I allowed to revise? And side note, even translating something is a revision. Remixing. What am I allowed to cut and paste from? And then finally, redistribute. What am I allowed to, how am I allowed to make copies and redistribute? Okay, the 9th way to become copyrighteous is through attribution. So, most of the things we've talked about so far is knowing whether or not I can use something in my classroom. So once you know you can, now it's time to give proper credit to. So it's another tangible way to model for students and staff members. If you if you use something, just cite it. Get into the habit of doing it. And it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be in the notes of your Google slide presentation. It can be at the bottom of your HyperDoc. It can be the last slide of a slide deck. It can be your attribution slide. And I mentioned this before, but I attribute everything just to have that that tangible way to bring up that conversation and to model. It's a visible way to show the skill. So I've talked a lot about attribution. What should it look like? And how should you have your kids properly attributing those images when you get started with that easy way, that easy point of entry to copyright? So proper attribution, and this comes from Creative Commons, best practices to attribution. There's an openly licensed wiki on this. And it asks for 4 things. So you get these 4 pieces of information, and then you hyperlink the heck out of them. So you need the title of the source, the title of the thing that you're using, the picture, in this case, the author or the person that took the picture, the source, and then the license. And so this is what it looks like in practice. So I'm pretending here in this example that that's my son, Riker Gill. He took a cool picture, and he licensed it under Creative Commons 0, which again is like Creative Commons version of public domain. So in this example, I've got cool picture, and then if I were to click on it, it would take me back to the source of where that image is found. And then by Riker Gill, I have the author here, and then if I click on that, it will take me back to the landing page of that author or that photographer, like a Flickr page, if you will. And then finally is licensed under CC0, and then if I click on this, it takes me to the Creative Commons page that explains what the heck CC0 even means in layman's terms. So sure, getting those 4 pieces of information and manually hyperlinking them is something you could do. That's an extra step for sure. I'm not going to lie about it, but that's why I showed you those other things. So heading to places that you don't have to cite your pictures at all still allows you to have a conversation and still allows you to be a responsible designer. And then the Creative Commons one-click attribution is amazing. It does all of that for you in one click and then paste. So that's what it looks like. Those are all the things you need to have in it, and you can find more about how to do that. I talk a lot about it in the book Copyrighteous, and I'm excited to give one of those copies away in a minute here. And then finally, really, this is the heart of what it means to be a copyrighteous educator. So beg, borrow, and steal. That's a phrase that I've said. That's a phrase I've heard in my years as an educator. And I'm sure that there are educators here that have said it. And I really believe that the words that we choose to talk about our craft really matter. They shape our culture. And we as educators know what it means to share and connect with other teachers and not teach in a silo. And we know what it feels like to feel overwhelmed and alone in those moments where we find ourselves in a silo. So my call to action to you is to change that culture of beg, borrow, and steal, because we're not begging, we're not borrowing, we're not stealing from each other. We have created a culture that is open to sharing, that honors responsible creativity, and ultimately allows us to have reflection, to grow as educators. So ask to use things if you're not sure if you should be. Share the things that you find and create openly, and then cite what you use to match what education really looks like. It is a landscape of really, really passionate professionals. We value ourselves as creators. We want to be treated as professionals. And we are in a culture that supports one another. Especially right now, there is absolutely no way that we would survive if we didn't have that culture. So shift the way that you talk about your craft, because we are responsible designers. Again, I hope that you've been able to take some pieces away from our conversation today. We have a few minutes for questions. If you want to know more, tweet me at Diana Gill. Grab a copy of Copyrighteous on Amazon. Yeah. What's up? Someone talk to me.
You did so good. That was great.
It was fun, even though I was talking to myself.
So one of these questions is actually my fault, because I just can't remember the 4 sites that you listed about the open ed resources. Can you repeat those so I can type them in? Sure.
Guru, CK12, Creative Commons, and OER Commons. There's so many. Those are just my personal favorite, but I know I have a science teacher friend who really likes PhET simulations. Those are openly licensed. There's a ton. And if you are, if you're like, hey, I'm a second grade teacher, what's the best OER platform to use? We'll find out.
Is it like GURU, or is it the
GOORU? Yeah.
GOO.
Should I stop sharing? Yeah. Do you want me to hear? I can copy and paste those into the.
That's probably a good idea. I don't know how to spell that. You're muted, so I don't know what you're saying, Seth.
It's like it's the first day, and I forgot to unmute myself. Okay, just want everybody to know that Diana gave us the rights to use this awesome background.
Yes.
So copyrighteous.
I'm coming for you.
I swear, I have an email. So yeah, thank you everybody for paying attention. I'm not seeing any questions coming across, just like, good job, thank you, awesome job, things like that, which I totally agree with, and could not agree more with, just let's help each other out. And we are also collecting all of these great links that Diana and other presenters have shared with us. And if you are a registered attendee, you'll be getting an email next week with all of the links that are shared all week long. So.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I'm going to jump off here in a second, and I'll tweet at the winner of who gets a copy of Copyrighteous. I feel like doing a happy dance right now.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Diana.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Allison.
Thank you.
And we've got, I forgot one more thing, that if you're looking for the professional growth points.
Oh, yeah.
There's that bit.ly, or it's in the descriptions of the videos, or it's in your email. You can fill that out and get your professional growth points for this, for watching this session and participating. And if you have any questions, tweet at her. She's awesome.
Great.
You guys are the best.
All right. Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.